Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. And today I've got to say I'm really excited about this one. We have with us Dr. Shannon Putman, and she's been very much in the social media news, in the news recently, because she's done something quite remarkable. And just to kind of explain who Shannon is, she's a pioneering entrepreneur in the field of XR and education, and has a host of accolades and best use cases to point to, including being responsible for the single largest rollout of educational VR in the USA, and that's what I'm really excited about. Shannon combines her 10 plus years of expertise and love for immersive tech with her 15 years of classroom experience to create learning experiences that have long-lasting impact. She's a university professor teaching VR and marketing, and the founder and CEO of Putman Consulting, whose mission is based on the single simple question: what is best for students? Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
So I'm going to just jump right in. I was blown away when I heard about this project. So maybe you can tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, lots of travel. We started with 32 counties and 33 high schools, and we have now added another 5 schools, 4 high schools and 1 middle school. And the schools that we have added, those are specifically working with moderate to severe disability classrooms. So super excited about that, because that's my wheelhouse. That's where I came from with special ed. So my heart's kind of always been there. And then the 2450 are in area technology centers, which in the past people would probably think of them as like vocational schools. But they've expanded to include, the modern vocational programs such as computer-aided design, international business, and they're just doing fantastic things. So it's an honor to be able to support the educators and the students at those locations.
So where did this idea come from? Like, where did it start?
So I actually started working with VR about 12 years ago when Oculus had their DK2 kit out, and I was a classroom teacher, and I just was always drawn to technology, because it gave access to my special ed students that they typically didn't have in other ways. And I always tell the story about how I got started in VR and when I bought into it, because I would ask my parents every year, like, what was a goal they had for the school year, because I had the same students for 6 years. And it didn't have to be educational. And I had a mom, through tears, tell me she just wanted to go out to eat because their son had autism and their daughter did not, and they were never able to go out to dinner. And I'm like, well, I just got this new headset thing. Let me give it a try. And I went out to the local restaurant, which was their favorite, which was called O'Charlie's. And they used to have free pie Wednesdays. And man, that place was bussin' on a Wednesday because people like their pies. So I went out and I filmed with a 360 camera. It was the first thing I ever tried. The manager was great. The servers, other people, everybody was great. Like, people would be loud on purpose. They'd drop things. And I just brought it back, and we worked every day. He had to make it 60 seconds longer every day. And at the end of 6 months, he made it an hour and 13 minutes at the restaurant. Wow. So from that moment on, I was hooked. So I feel like this project has been 12 years in the making, because I've just continued to work with VR ever since then. I opened up the first VR lab in an elementary school in Kentucky in 2018, and we had 50 Oculus Go's. And then we upgraded to the HTC Vive Focus Plus. And then I went and finished up my PhD at U of L, University of Louisville, and in technology as educational interventions focused in virtual reality. And then I got a call from Jason Wheatley is his name. That's my man at Kentucky Department of Ed. And he's like, hey, we've got this COVID funding. I want to do something with VR, but I don't know anything about it. Do you have an idea? I'm like, do I have an idea? And so then the project just took off.
Wow. So I just find it fascinating. I mean, you really did start, back in the days when I think a lot of people were really unsure about where VR was going, what was the use case for VR, and it's almost ended up where a lot of people are seeing the potential and impact that VR can have in education, and obviously not just kind of school-based education, but like adult education, vocational education. But I really, I've always found that one of the big pushbacks with VR is around accessibility, and that's why I'm quite fascinated when you're saying kind of you're using it in a lot of special needs cases, and I'm curious to hear how you kind of link those two together.
Yeah, so accessibility and access and representation has always been the forefront of what I do, and I always have advocated for my students. I can't advocate for myself, but for them, man, I can go to war. So I had every student. I worked at Concord Elementary in Jefferson County Public Schools, and I had every student in that school that wanted to, because we never force a headset on any student. Unlike some other forms of technology, it's the one that we never force students to use. We encourage them, but it's always their choice. And I had every type of student. I've worked with, obviously students with autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, physical disabilities, cerebral palsy, paralyzed from the neck down, spinal cord injuries, deaf. We were the deaf hub for all signing students in JCPS and elementary. And that's one of the areas that I'm really passionate about with some of the new buzz terms that are coming out and things like that. And I'm sure we'll probably get to it and I can tell you about that. But until the industry starts to adapt the technology and think of our special needs populations, nothing's going to change. So I'm trying to do that. So a lot of people they'll say, oh, well, there's hand tracking and, you can do that. And I'm like, okay, but you can't play Beat Saber with hand tracking because they didn't design it that way because they weren't thinking of people like that. So I'm designing a game with a friend of mine, her son, and he's in a wheelchair and he can't really use his arms and pronate. So we're using head tilting and head movements and then voice recognition. Because of course he's 10, so he wants it to be a first-person shooter. So we're making it school-friendly. But so until we start to actually think of those options when we're designing things, nothing's going to change. So I'm hoping to try to get the industry as a whole to think about those things, because it's not like you can design it so that everybody wants to play it, everybody wants to use it, and that's what's exciting too with creating things like that, especially using eye gaze and all that kind of stuff, is that like all my students like to use it, so it's fun for everybody. So it's not like, oh, here's the special ed student has to have this special adaptation or this special piece of equipment. Like they can use it just like everybody else, and that's really the goal, because in the industry it's a great community, and they talk about VR is such a community and everybody can be involved, and I'm like, can they though? And so we need to open it up so that they are actually included.
I mean, do you still think that there are areas where VR is just not suited? I mean, obviously, kind of for maybe people who are struggling, don't have sight, but I mean, even is there any areas you think that it's still not quite there yet?
Oh, absolutely. Just the way we interact with the actual technology. That student that I mentioned, I would watch him and his brother, and they would play VR, and mostly it was him watching his brother play because he couldn't use his hands. So it's like, if you can't use a controller, you can't even choose the app that you want unless you can cast, or you use, like we use Manage XR for our project, so you can launch the app for them, which is great. And it's a good filler for now, but they need to be able to use it independently, because what if somebody isn't there to launch like an app for them? So that interactivity piece of VR is still very limiting, I think. If you have any type of physical issue with, squeezing a button or, anything like that, then a lot of it is not available to you.
And I guess that the challenge that most people will probably use to defend that is that there's not enough kind of market adoption of the technology to justify doing these types of things. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hear that and I get that and I understand that, everybody needs to make money. However, when you do it with the way that I'm doing it and the way that you can, then it's like I said, everybody wants to use it. Like the game I'm designing, all kids like it, they all want to play it. So all we did was make it accessible, but we still made it fun and everything else. So, especially as we're seeing AI and everything, one of the obviously big buzz topics, but it's really not that hard to make things accessible, especially, if you use voice commands, that can be, a great thing, voice activation. And then people are like, well, what about our, non-speaking people? And I'm like, yep. So there's always going to be somebody, I get it. But I don't think we ever stop striving to make it accessible, especially when you can do it in a way that you can still make money and they can still have access.
Definitely. I want to kind of just jump a little bit into a different place, because I think a lot of the challenges you've had in kind of getting this stuff out in the scale that you've got it out to is what a lot of people are almost afraid of. It's one of the blockers of why people will even adopt the technology, and that is how you actually manage large scale deployments. And that's everything from, you've talked about manage XR, which is a kind of way of kiosking and controlling the environments. But how do you, people are worried about, kind of VR headsets getting damaged and replacement costs and growing legs and walking out the classroom and all of these kind of practicalities, kind of swap classroom for corporate environment. And I think that's, and then there's the ever practical, how do you actually manage the process within a classroom? Does every single kid have their own VR headset, or do you do it in small groups? So I'm curious to hear how it actually practically plays out.
Yeah, so one nice thing about being a former classroom teacher is that I get it and I know teachers. I know teachers and I love us. However, I always give the analogy because I feel like I could be at a staff meeting and I could be like, all right, guys, all you got to do is swallow this pill every morning and the kids will listen to everything you have to say and they'll comprehend everything you teach them and they'll follow all your instructions. And like before I even finish, somebody from the back's going to be like, well, don't you have a chewable? Or like, who's going to give me the water to swallow it? Like, there's just somebody who always has to complain and they give you a problem before it even happens. So, with that teacher in mind, is how I designed this entire project. Every step of the way, I thought of that teacher and that problem that they were going to say, and I have so far tried to have an answer for everything. So Manage XR does so much more than just like a kiosk mode. You can actually track the headsets. So if they get up and walk away, I'm like, you can go ahead and knock on the kid's door and be like, hey, give me my headset back. And so like got that answer. If it gets damaged, like so can a Chromebook, and with, depending on the price and what headset you get, the Quest 2 being at $199 right now is an unbelievable price. And I'm not headset specific. I don't, no headset company pays me to sell their headsets or anything. So I, always recommend what I think is best for, the situation. But that can happen with anything. So, okay, they're pretty durable. And if you use the protective wrist loop, the controllers usually are, pretty strong too. And so like, what makes me different and what I think makes this project different and why I feel like it's continuing to be successful is because I really spend the time to actually teach the educators how to use it in their instruction, as opposed to just handing them a case with 30 headsets preloaded, lesson plans, and a script. Like, to me, that's not using VR in your instruction. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to buy something that comes with a lesson plan and a script, like, why did I go to college then? Because you could just write your lesson plan for me. So like giving the teacher the freedom and the understanding of how to use it in their instruction. Because if we don't do that, then it doesn't matter how many headsets come out. It's going to be just like Google Expeditions, and you're going to run out of field trips and you're going to run out of content. So you have to understand how to use what you have as opposed to looking for something specific for what you're doing. And I absolutely think there is a time and a place for, the quote unquote turnkey scripted apps. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like against those, but if that's all you rely on, you're never going to be able to keep up. And the example I give is, when I had a teacher ask about money skills, there's no VR app, let's teach money, but there's a fishing game called Bait. And let me tell you, every time you catch a fish, you earn money. And it was the best lesson I have ever done. But you have to be willing to think differently instead of, is there an app for that? Is there an app for that? There doesn't have to be.
So just listening to kind of what you've said there around managing it really, for all the people watching, as someone who builds VR solutions and has seen the practicalities of what it takes to kind of roll it out, and we've kind of done it into educational institutions, I'm sure a lot of people don't have a frame of reference, and even I'm really, really curious to know what a day in the life of a teacher using your technology and the day in the life of the student practically looks like.
Yeah, so it's kind of like with any other technology, except that it's better in my opinion. But you know, there's going to be days you use the headset and days you don't. I loved Google Expeditions because it got teachers actually interested in VR, but it kind of set up this false narrative that A, you have to have everybody on all at the same time, and B, that, you know, like, oh, well, I can see where everybody's looking, and it's like, well, oh, you can see where the headset's pointed, and you took them on a field trip to Mount Rushmore. Like, okay, why is it so important for you to have that feature? You know, and talking about through it with teachers, you know, they're like, well, I want to see what they're doing. And I'm like, well, with Manage XR, you have total control over the headset. So if they get to something they're not supposed to, it's because either A, they're like NSA level hacking, or B, an adult made a mistake. So we do a lot of training around that, so that doesn't happen. So it's like, let's not think of it as like a gotcha, but as a, how can I help and release those reins to the student and allow them to be a creator, allow them to, you know, come up with content, talk about things they want to do. But it can be something as simple as you're reading a book about, about World War II. And then, you know, you watch a movie about World War II. Well, then you can go actually into the battlefield and go into a headset. So then you can actually feel what something was like. And I tell teachers too, even if it's a 2D video, it's still great to use the headset for that, because when you show a video up on your smartboard, let's face it, kids are looking at their watches, there's the screen, they're doodling, you know, when you put them in the headset, they can only focus on what I want them to focus on. And that's one of the great benefits, is you have their total attention. And it also allows them to consume a 3D content in a 3D format, which is why it's so effective. I always think about, especially in 5th grade, we teach kids how to do volume by looking at a 2D picture of a block and being like, okay, imagine there's 2 more cubes behind it. Like, it's ridiculous and it's incredibly hard to do. So instead, you know, we give them the Unifix cubes. Okay, well, let's take that and apply it to everything. So now we're actually seeing it in, you know, to scale, and all of those concepts that we ask students to imagine, they don't have to imagine anymore. They can see it. And somebody like me who doesn't have good spatial awareness, if you ever saw my car, you would know that, because I run into a lot of stuff, unfortunately. And so that was always very hard for me. So it isn't anymore, because I can actually see it. I don't have to imagine things that don't make sense to me.
So just coming back then to the content, because you kind of said, you know, with Google Expedition, that the challenge is that you run out of content very quickly. What is your whole kind of thought around, I mean, it seems like you're doing some very clever stuff, you know, like kind of repurposing things that were maybe intended for other purposes, but finding a novel way to bring them into an educational perspective. But in terms of educational experiences linked to the curriculum, is there not a problem with just availability of content?
I think there can be, and a lot of the times where I see where people kind of struggle is they know they like want to use VR, but they don't really know much about it, so they just like Google like VR and like social emotional learning, and it's like, okay, well, I have to have something that's designed for social emotional learning. Well, that is a very wide concept, so you can use a lot of things for social emotional learning. And for this project, we were able to get, each school has 2 years of 4 software. They've got Manage XR, they have Career View XR, Engage, and XReps. And so I picked the software that I figured would cover the most possible areas with still understanding that, yeah, there's probably going to need to be future potential investment, just like with a Chromebook or an iPad. You're going to need more content. Engage is like the Swiss Army knife, so you can do any and everything in Engage, and that covers everything. And then also with XReps, it's a football simulation system, and you play as the quarterback, and it's cognitive-based drills. And so I'm really proud of that. That I'm now a co-founder of that company, and we took what I did in the classroom and brought it into VR. And so we've added a social emotional learning component. So now when you're playing, you either have a fan or another player kind of trash talking you. So some people that have those triggers, it's like, how do you ignore them? How do you respond when somebody is, and that's a very real social situation. Yeah, maybe everybody doesn't play sports, but everybody's experienced road rage or somebody cuts you in line. It just anytime you're in society, there's going to be conflict. So again, continuing to understand the technology before you purchase it is, I think, one of the biggest things. And then also, because it is moving so fast, understanding, okay, do I pay a lot of money for this headset up front? Or, is it going to last longer? Those are all questions, that you really need to research and talk to somebody like me or somebody in the industry that, can really guide you. Because I always call it cheat the system, CTS, because in a special ed class, teachers, we don't have money, so we usually use our own money, and we have to make things work. So knowing how to get more bang for your buck, like I said, Engage is a software that covers everything. So instead of buying, and I have nothing against, I'm not at all saying anything against those VR welding machines, but that's the only thing it can do. So you can only use it for welding. You can't use it for all the other things. So if you don't have a lot, try to get something that covers a lot of areas. And I say where we currently are, I would take one headset over 30 computers right now, if possible, because of the potential. And you can, like I said, you can get started with one. I started with one, and then I got two, and we would do relay races and everything. You can do so much as long as you're creative with it.
So, in a classroom setting at the moment, is it a case where all of the kids are now in headsets, or is it where a lot of the teachers has to manage a classroom almost like a kind of a circuit-based course where, some kids will be over here doing the kind of hands-on project, and the other kids will be over there doing the VR, and some other kids will be over there kind of reading, or is it like everybody in a VR headset?
It all depends. That's another great thing about this project is each location got 70, so they have the option, and it's what works for them. And in my classroom, I've done both. I've had 30 kindergartners on at one time, and I've had one headset. And so, I would have students like Google, one student was like Googling outer space, and they were having to write sentences about it. And another one was watching a video on it. And then the third group was actually in the VR headset on the Apollo 11 mission. And then I compared their writing. So it really is what works for you. That's why it's so nice. It's flexible. I have not seen anything better for motivation, with students, and I really don't even entertain they have to be intrinsically motivated. I don't even really entertain that conversation anymore because nobody is. And yes, that's obviously always a goal. However, I don't change the way my kids learn. I change the way I teach. And if they need to be motivated, then I'm going to do what it takes to motivate them. And I had a student, Jeremiah. He was my boy, man. I wear him on my wrist. He was amazing. But when he would get mad, he wouldn't be able to control himself. And I would tell him, Jeremiah, if you can make it through the day without punching somebody in the face, you can come down at the end of the day and you can play Creed and you can punch as many people in the face as you want. And 95% of the time it worked. Of course, nothing's ever perfect. Some days he didn't make it, but nothing worked better than VR. And then you're getting them up, you're getting them out of their seats, they're burning energy. What teacher doesn't know, doesn't have that kid that's like, all right, if I hear your voice again in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to quit. Even though you love that kid the most, they need a break from your voice and you need a break from their voice. So VR lets you do that, and it lets you have fun. You can have fun with the kids. That fishing lesson was amazing. Those kids talked to me more and showed me the fish and did everything, more than they ever did. And they're like, Miss Shannon, you're fishing. And I still have kids email me about it. So you can literally make school fun, which is what it should be. Learning should be fun. And that's what it allows you to do. So it really can be what you need it to be. It doesn't have to be any certain way. So there's no model that says do it this way or do it that way. It's what works for the teacher, what works for your space and your students.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm just, I mean, there's so many things in there that I'm seeing in terms of kind of like how it makes impact, the value add. But I mean, how do you condense that story to kind of potential new schools that you want to get into? I mean, and to parents, yeah, how do you kind of say, well, here's the value add of why you should care about your kid having exposure to VR? Are you able to kind of summarize it?
Yeah, so I think what's really good is my undergrad was not in education. I double majored crim psych and minor in abnormal behavior, and so like human behavior was always a very interesting to me in function of behavior, and I think that's what made me a good teacher. Is I would really work to figure out why a student was doing a certain behavior. So my thing is meeting with people, talking with people, and then figuring out what your motivation is. So I don't care why you would want to use VR, but I'm gonna tell you what, like I'm gonna find out what that is, and that's what I'm gonna target. And I say because when I first started, I was fortunate enough to get $25,000 grant, and my principal allowed me to use all of that for VR. And the reason being, he and I've actually interviewed serial killers on death row in Florida, and he was the most narcissistic person I have ever met in my entire life. But I knew that. So I'm like, okay, this is how I'm going to use this technology to make you look good. You're going to be the most progressive principal. You're going to look amazing. And he did. I'm like, you're going to get on the news. People are going to be talking about you. And they did. So in the end, he got all that attention. I didn't care because the kids got VR. So finding out what that motivating factor is. If for a parent, if it's you want your kid to get out and stop playing video games and just sitting around, well, here's a full body video game and they can burn calories. If it's a teacher and they're like, my students are really struggling with this, I'm like, okay, got it, tell me what you're doing and I will tell you how VR can fit into it. Because so many times people ask me, well, what can I do with VR? Well, anything. We're only limited by your imagination. So the better question is, what are you doing? And I'll tell you where it can fit. Because it's not going to fit for everything. And that's the thing, too. It's a tool in the toolkit. It's not a replacement. It's an enhancement. And so many teachers are worried about it being a replacement. And I'm like, we are so far from the dystopian Ready Player One future. Like, you don't understand. That's not happening. This is an enhancement. And like I said, letting go of the reins and letting the students, take some of the lead and give them the opportunity to experience things.
I mean, do you find that there's an inherent fear of new technology when it comes to teachers?
100%. And I kind of call it the smartboard effect because, when we went from overheads to smartboards came out and they were awesome. They had so much functionality, but it was so overwhelming that teachers got overwhelmed, and then all they basically turned into were giant projection screens. Maybe they'd use like the magic pen every once in a while, but that was it. And now we're onto flat screen TVs, whatever. So if it doesn't work right out of the box, and these headsets all came set up ready to go, that was another major decision in the project. I was like, they have to be able to open that box and use them, whether they have internet or not, whatever, everything has to be ready to go. And it was. So if it has to work, and then they have to understand how it's going to make their life easier, not harder. Because teachers, man, we've taken a beating, especially post-COVID. A lot of people, were asked as teachers to handle a lot of issues that we're not trained for, a lot of behavior problems, a lot of big things, and we kind of go unappreciated in that respect. So I'm like, look, I get it. I know what it's like. I've been there. I've had my principal come in and say, where are your I can statements when I'm dodging a desk that's being thrown at me? And so I approach them with, this is how it's going to make your life easier. This is how it's going to make your students learn. This is how you can use it, and I tend to have really good success with that. But what's been hard has been focusing on those believers, because I used to want to focus on those non-believers because I'm like, I know I'm right and I'm going to make you see that I'm right. And it was like, finally, I was like, all right, I got to just focus on those who are ready and willing, and, the others will come around or they won't. But at least I know if I focus on those that are going to do it, then those students will be getting that.
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy, because sooner or later, everybody is going to feel that FOMO. And if it's working over there, then what am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious if just going back on this remarkable project. I mean, there were so many challenges, so many obstacles. I love the fact that your very first project, just was going into a restaurant with a 360-degree camera. And if I think about how many people wouldn't even know where to start, I mean, I've often say to people, it's easy, just get a 360 camera, and they look at me like a deer in the headlights, going, I don't even know where to start with a 360 camera. Mm-hmm. So I love that you just just take on a challenge and move on, and just overcome. But looking at this whole process, I'm really curious to know, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned along the way?
Definitely that the tech has to be, like I said, ready to go. Because if, depending on the headset and everything, what headset you get, what, setup has to go into it, that can be a huge barrier if we're asking teachers to do that on top of everything else. So that's been one for sure. A Manage XR software has literally changed the game, because when I had those 50 Oculus Go's, we didn't have anything like that. So I used to load my dogs and my husband up on a Sunday and go into the school and put on every headset and update every headset, make sure whatever app I needed, whatever. And that's just not realistic, so having a way to manage them is completely changes the game, because you can have even 70, you can be sitting on your couch at night and be like, you know what, I want to use the headset tomorrow, boop boop boop, get on your computer and have them ready to go when you walk in the morning. So that's huge. And then like I said, just really getting the teachers to understand the technology so they can be creative and learn how to integrate it, and that just happens to be one of my strengths. People are like, oh, you have your PhD, you must be really smart. I'm like, no, I just outwork people, and I cried my way through every single stats class, and fractions still make me cry. But my pockets of intelligence are making things creative and using what I already have and making it work because of not having things. I wanted to use, a QR code so my students could independently turn in their homework. And this was before even iPads. So now it's on everybody's camera phone, but I had to take my computer and make it run BlueStack so it would be Android, and then get a PlayStation 2 camera, but we made it work. So I think that that necessity, of making things work, is where it comes from. And so seeing what I want to accomplish, and then what do I have and how can I make it work, all while still continuing to try to develop more things. Like I said, I'm not in any way, shape, or form against having those apps and stuff like that. But kind of just like with anything, if you don't have any more money, then what can you do with what you have?
I mean, in these kinds of projects, there's often a lot of creativity. And when you give it to teachers, it's almost like kind of giving them a tool, and then you're almost like out of control, how they intend to use it, how it gets kind of implemented. Have there been any kind of wonderful surprises or unexpected things that you never saw coming?
Oh yeah, there's been a ton, and I learn from teachers every day. I always joke with them like, I'm stealing that. But I continue to learn from them every day. One gentleman came up with this unbelievable way of hanging the headsets, and he couldn't actually drill anything into the wall, so he came up with this system which was unbelievable. And then also, when I first started in VR, I always had to constantly fight the idea of, oh, that's just a game. That's just a game. Well, A, so what if it is? But B, now when I've been going some of these principles, they're like, all right, how do I get some games on these things? And I'm like, wait, you want them to play? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh. It was like angelic music goes off. So that was a huge surprise. And then actually a principal told me, and this is where it really finally clicked. I hadn't anticipated this. Usually they finish their certification testing 2 weeks before winter break. And typically that last 2 weeks before break, attendance is, around 20% because the kids have no reason to come to school. Mm-hmm. Well, since they had the VR headsets, that number went up to over 80%. Because they wanted to come to school, because they wanted to play VR, because they weren't going to have a chance to do it anywhere else. And so that right there to me was huge. If nothing else, you're keeping your students in school. What can be better than that?
That's great. There is, because we're on the topic of education and VR, I'm always kind of, I want to ask this very selfish question, is a lot of the reasons or rationales of why I understand VR to be a superior technology when it comes to teaching is this concept of being able to teach experientially and to do that at scale. Whereas, traditionally within large classrooms, it's been very difficult to do a lot of experiential type learning. Is normally it's ending up being chalk and talk type stuff and kind of speaking at the kids. Have you noticed firstly, are you using this predominantly as a tool for experiential learning? And if so, are you starting to see some of the benefits that the industry has said you should start to see with experiential learning, saying like increased knowledge retention, being able to kind of master things a lot faster?
Yeah. And obviously, we're going to need to continue to do research and, drive the industry forward that way because we know research guides practice. The whole like buzz term of project-based learning, when that came out a couple years ago, that's just like quality instruction. So before, VR headsets, if we were teaching context clues, I actually like went and got, black light paint and did like a whole CSI day where you had to find the clues, and the kids, and that was so engaging and the kids loved it. So teachers have always been creative, I think, and this just gives them another avenue. So I've seen it improve lots of different things. I used it with volume with my fifth graders. I also, for my dissertation, I created a VR experience that relives the life of Representative John Lewis. And you follow him, starting with his chickens, preaching, to his chickens on his farm, and go all the way up through the march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I did a pre and post content test. I used it with pre-service teachers, and those that saw it in VR compared to computer, like learned, more, scored better from, pre to post. And then actually I analyzed their lesson plans, and the ones that did the VR included more technology in their lesson plan. Not even just VR, just more technology in general. So I'm seeing all these other kind of things that are happening, besides that idea of creating an emotional and authentic engagement to the material, but these other things that are popping up that it's able to do.
And I'm just curious as to how you've got this remarkable now depth of knowledge and experience of rolling out VR at scale in a very I would say kind of unmanaged, uncoordinated environment, which is schools, because every school is its own entity and kind of probably it's the perfect kind of chaos type of project. But just kind of extrapolating everything you've learned and then thinking about the kind of working world, what can people in learning and development departments in companies essentially kind of learn from what you've achieved here?
I think it's the same kind of thing because, even though I'm currently focused on, the classroom side of education, quality instruction is quality instruction. The student and the content is of no consequence. So it can be used for anything. And I have interest too. Like I said, XReps, is a company of mine now that, me and three guys, and we're always pushing it forward. So I love athletics and sports, Bills fan since I was 3, because I'm originally from Syracuse. And so seeing it with athletic performance, the whole idea behind XReps was the cognitive-based drills to make a smarter quarterback. Because if you can make smarter decisions, you can perform better. So if you're a company, it's what are you doing? And then I can help or learn how to integrate VR into what you're doing. So what is the problem and what would we typically do to fix it? Okay, well, how can we fix it here? Whether that's soft skills, using it to practice interacting with a customer, or, if you have issues with a coworker or your boss, things like that. It's great for soft skills. Any of those things that you would want to improve, there's a way to use VR to do it. And I mean, like I said, there's some things that's just not going to be the solution, and that's okay too. That's the other thing. I think people in VR, like in the industry, every year it was like, oh, VR is dead, VR is dead. Like, no, it doesn't have to be used every day for everything. Nothing is like that. And that's okay. It's okay if it goes a couple weeks and you haven't used the headsets. I personally use them more than that, but that's okay. Not forcing it and just using it, to your advantage and something that feels natural, not forcing it. When people get forced into things, they don't tend to like it. So, like I said, finding that motivation and then, learning how to integrate it with what you want to accomplish.
And now, just we talked a little bit about the content thing, but in terms of just going beyond the tools that you're using to starting to see the utilization of kind of narrow AI adaptation, like kind of software, things that can create 3D objects for you just from a prompt, and things that can create 360 immersive environments, and things that can create avatars, and having large language models that can create personalities that you can have a pretty meaningful, engaging conversation with. Are you kind of starting to look at any of those types of like look at that landscape as a way of also kind of fast tracking, almost on the fly content generation? So if you kind of want to have a class and you want to have them meet Abraham Lincoln, you can just go and say, hey, ChatGPT, I want you to behave like Abraham Lincoln today, and these are all the things that I want you to focus on, and start to use that as almost like a chatbot experience with a 3D avatar that happens to look like Abraham Lincoln in a setting that's been designed to look like the Oval Office back in the day.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing though. It's about knowing the technology and we actually are Engage has an AI functionality that they've got, which is really cool, and actually interacting with historical figures. It's also it's a lot harder, like the AI has to kind of be trained and stuff, so it's not going to. We're getting there, but I don't think your average teacher right now would be able to, especially because in education everybody's so worried about AI and plagiarism and everything like that. Like they just shut it off and they get so scared. Whereas like with XReps, what we're doing is we're designing a coach, much like you're talking about, an AI coach. And so then when the student gets done, they go back to the locker room and they talk to the coach, and the coach tells them, all right, this is what you did well, this is where we need to improve, and then designs their next session based upon their results. So again, as the teacher, you'd still want to go over that with the student, but if you don't have time to do it right then, they're still getting that feedback that they need, and you don't have to take the time to plan the next lesson. That's all done for you, which is really exciting as a teacher. But also, that same coach, the teacher or student, can go in the morning and say, hey, coach, we're working on dosing conversion rates today in healthcare. And then they design the lesson that day around what you want it to do. So I'm seeing those things. And when we integrate these new technologies in ways like that, it's just going to take off. I mean, it already has, but it's just going to continue to get even better. But again, understanding that that's not just because you talk to Abe Lincoln today doesn't mean Abe Lincoln's going to be teaching the class tomorrow. It's not replacing you as the teacher, it's helping. And I think until the educational system starts to kind of get with it, and again let go of that control. I always hear a lot in education, well, I'm not going to let them win. Like, win what? So, well, if they get it, everybody's going to want it. Yeah, that's the point. So it's the most basic human principle. If then is the most basic human principle. If you want a yacht, then you got to have money. How do I get money? And so if you want VR, then you got to do your homework. Like, whatever it is, it can all be tied together and just make this harmonious, this mix, and finding that balance. Like I said, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing.
Yeah. I mean, but I think a lot of people are looking at what are the industries that are going to be most disrupted by this kind of emerging technology space, everything from spatial to kind of machine learning to AI, to immersive to metaverse, like just basically insert buzzword here. What do you see the education industry kind of adapting, or how do you see it adapting over the kind of course of the next 5 to 10 years, dealing with the stuff that's kind of starting to, like the early symptoms of the changes in technology?
So I started saying about 5 years ago, I said in 5 to 8 years, we're going to see VR headsets in classrooms like we have Chromebooks now. And I've been kind of bang on that, and I'm trying to ensure that that happens. So I see us having that evolution and going to that. And I think COVID taught us one thing is that we are not currently doing a good job of preparing our students to use the technology that they need to be successful in this world. And we saw that because a lot of schools were like, oh, we have one-to-one, devices, but the kids didn't know how to log into their own classroom, because so it takes all this learning and all these skills to be successful. So I continue to see that growing and then actually using that technology in the classroom. And it also creates so many jobs in all these different areas. And it's kind of the ATM example is when, they first debuted the ATM, bank tellers like revolted. They were like, this is gonna take our jobs. They're not gonna need us anymore. This is ridiculous. Well, what ended up happening is that people had easier access to their money, so they went to the bank more, and they actually had an increase in the amount of jobs that they needed for bank tellers. And so when I tell people that, I'm like, it makes, 3D content creators, all these things, 3D artists, sound engineers, 360 audio is a whole different ballgame. Designing things for a 360 environment is all new. So it opens up all these possibilities and these jobs for students that, they might not have previously thought were accessible to them.
Yeah. This is going to be one thing's for definite. It's going to be an exciting world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell people, because everybody always asks me about the Apple Vision Pro, and I'm like, well, it's not designed currently for classroom type use. And again, that's okay. That's great. It doesn't have to be. But what I love is that I tell teachers, I'm like, look, Apple's in the game now, so it's not going anywhere. Like, it's here to stay. You might as well get on board now because it's coming. If you don't already have it, it's coming. And so I love when anything pushes the industry forward. There's been people that have been working in this space since, the sword back in the day in the 70s and 80s and 90s. That there's always been trailblazers, and looking to them and what they did and learning from their experience, and hopefully I can do that for somebody else and can inspire somebody else, and then they'll continue to push everything forward. And it's just super exciting to be a part of.
That's amazing. It's just an incredible story, and sure. I think you've done a remarkable job. There was one thing you said a while ago, which I kind of put it in my mental my mental kind of little jar to come back to at a later stage. And you made a really, really intriguing statement earlier on. And when you were talking about your approach to education, you said, I refuse to change how my students learn, I change how I teach. Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting philosophy. How does that how is that perceived? Because I guess my observation of the education industry is it's kind of guilty of maybe not having adapted as much as it should have.
Yeah, I was always the hippie kind of teacher. I was the teacher, I always had, a basketball hoop in my room. I had sports, I had games, I had air hockey, things and, people would walk by and other teachers and they're like, oh, all you guys do is play. And I'm like, yeah, and here's the work that I got done in an hour that takes you 8 hours to get done. And again, it's all about motivating. And so, whether that was special ed students, gen ed students, I would tell them, I'd be like, hey guys, we've got an hour. We got to get through this material and this content. And if you do a good job and you give me your whole effort and we get through it in half an hour, you get a half an hour to play. You see everything that I have. But if I have to constantly stop and you're not doing it and we only have 2 minutes, then you get 2 minutes. So my behavior management was always different too, and a student could swear at me and I didn't care. I'd be like, look, that's lazy. Come up with a better insult. And I had one student, Paul, and he was like, you shouldn't wear horizontal stripes. I was like, wow, too good. Way too smart there. I asked for that one. So people would always see us playing and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, yeah, because that's how my kids learn. Sitting there and just listening to me talk is boring for me, and it's boring for them. And so a lot of people didn't embrace, what I did, but I didn't care because it was what was best for my students. And when you have a student who's, dealing with Down syndrome and autism and speech apraxia, your typical type of learning isn't going to work. Doesn't mean she's not capable. She's just as capable as every other student, and I'm going to get her there, but it's my job to figure out how to make that content accessible for her and how she learns. It's not her job to figure out how I work. And so that's just how I've always approached education. And if people don't approach it that way, then that's too bad, because the students are the only ones that suffer then. Because I was never a good test taker. Horrible. I cry all the time. But I could write an essay like nobody's business. So if I had a few teachers that did that for me, and it made a huge difference.
Yeah, it's this frustrating thing, like what you've described, is been this kind of frustration I've had, because I was not a great test taker either. In fact, some would say I was an incredible test taker, because I would finish an exam, a 3-hour exam, in 45 minutes, and then I'd be done and I'd be out the door. Didn't necessarily mean I got great marks, but I couldn't sit there and go over my work again and again and again. But since we finish school and since we finish university, the rest of life is about mastery. It's not about marks. It's not about how well you did in something. It's about how competent you are. And I've always wondered why we've never changed the education system to align to that kind of mastery-based approach.
I know. At least here in America, I don't think I think there's people are trying, and I think there's at least a little bit of an effort. And I understand we have to have some way to have results. Like, I get that. And I also understand there's a time for sit and get. There absolutely is, I mean, as an adult, you're going to have to sit and get. It's funny, like all the things we tell teachers not to do, we then do with each other. Like any teacher that's been to a PD, it's literally 6 hours of listening to somebody talk. And so it's like, yeah, and it's boring, isn't it? Like, yeah, it is. So, but if I have kids, they can play, air hockey for 20 minutes. And then guess what? They've now gotten that 20 minutes out and movement and fun and create, competitive and learning how to lose. I think that's a skill that is vastly underappreciated nowadays. Kids don't know how to lose. They're like, he cheated. I'm like, no, you literally just lost. Like, and so you're going to lose in life. As I tell them, I'm like, it doesn't matter what it is, you're going to lose, and a lot, and you need to be able to handle it. I'm not always great at it, but I'm working on it. So the more people that we have, kind of getting that and understanding that there's so much more to a student. And that the age of that student can be birth to death. It doesn't matter, but they have so much more to offer than just a simple test score.
Wow, great philosophy, and I want to stop for a second, because I think when we first started this podcast, this Impact Learning Visionaries, the whole idea around it, and what really kind of gave birth to it is, I think the educational and learning and development industry is it's a very kind of encapsulated industry, and I think it gets a lot of bad rap, and always felt sad, because I've firsthand seen these kind of heroes inside the industry, whether they're in the school system or whether they're in kind of departments in corporates, doing incredible things and almost being kind of taken for granted, or they're not the ones bringing in the kind of revenues. So and this whole podcast was birthed on this kind of way of elevating these people and showcasing them, and it's the reason I mention that is you're a perfect example of someone, I think, who's just achieved something so incredibly remarkable. I mean, if I think about all the conversations I've had with people, it feels like I'm ice skating uphill, trying to convince people to use VR. I'm trying every lever, every trick in the book, and there's always this resistance. So it's incredible to see someone who's not only overcome that, but probably overcome it in one of the most resistant industries when it comes to embracing technology. So well done. You've done an incredible and absolutely remarkable job.
Well, thank you so much for that. That's unbelievable. That gives me chills. That I'm honored for you to say that, and I appreciate it. And I think as you know, as teachers, I've struggled with the whole idea of making money. Because it's like ingrained in you, like oh, you do this because it's a higher calling, and you love kids, and how dare you want to raise? You get summers off, whatever, and it's like wow, like you've been made to feel guilty for wanting to make money. And so going, into this now, it's like, no, I can still help students and I can make money and be a good person. And it is possible. And so, as long as I just keep that guiding principle, what's best for students, if I hang on to that, then that's all that matters to me. I'm not motivated by money. My husband makes good money. We have a 3-legged beagle. We don't have any kids. So, granted, I spend a lot on that beagle, but, but that doesn't,
the beagle's name is not Tripod.
it is not, but it's Peggy
Okay.
for her peg leg.
Okay.
It's a little more creative, yeah. Little bit more creative. And she was a pirate with a peg leg for Halloween. But yeah, so but that doesn't mean I don't want to get paid for the work that I do and the expertise that I bring. And that's, I think, especially for, and I don't want to pull the like gender card, but especially for women and women in the tech industry and women in education, because women don't tend to cheer on other women either. So it's this. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I am an expert. I do get paid for my time now. That's very hard for me to like stand and own that, and people are like, oh, people need to call you doctor. And I'm like, no, they don't. And I'm like, like I introduce myself that way in a professional setting, but then I'm still just Shannon, because I've never judged people by their title. So I don't want them to judge me by it, and instead by what I do. So it's not a disrespect in any way. I'm super proud of my PhD and that I earned it and everything, but it's not the only thing about me.
All right. So as we kind of come to the end, I think there's we kind of always end off with two things. I think one we've tackled very successfully, which is kind of looking at the practical side of how you go about doing this, and your kind of creative approach of saying, if there's a problem in front of you, find a way to overcome it. Don't be daunted by the technology. Embrace it and find a way through. I think that's the kind of advice I think you've imparted really brilliantly. I think a lot of people have this fear of trying new things, and but I think you've showcased that if you just take a step forward, you'll probably make mistakes along the way, but you'll end up doing something quite remarkable despite those mistakes. So it just then I think brings us to the last question, which is we always ask our guests to share a book, a podcast, an experience, or something that's happened to them recently that's created a moment of joy or wonder, delight.
Let me see. There is a book called The Brain That Healed Itself, and I was fascinated by it. I've always been big into the brain and neuroscience and everything, but I mean, learning that we don't actually see with our eyes, and blind people can see through, their tongue, and just unbelievable. And it truly showed the power of the brain and how resilient it is, and how, as people, how resilient we are. And I think it just always goes back to my students, I wanted to know, okay, they didn't understand it. Why? What part of the brain is responsible for this learning? What can I do? How can I target it? And to understand that the brain can literally rewire itself and that we have that power. It was great for me. And I made the mistake of telling my mom, and she's like, see, you can learn fractions. And so I'm like, no, I can't.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Right, I know, it backfired. Like, dang. They're just dumb. But yeah, that was a fantastic book that opened my eyes to a lot of things, and just so much that I still don't know. And that's kind of exciting, that there's so much more to learn.
Brilliant. Well, Shannon, it's been an absolute joy and a pleasure to have you on the show, and the time has flown by. But thank you for sharing this incredible wisdom, and I look forward to following your journey and just seeing as you continue to kind of do this remarkable task of just getting more and more kids into VR headsets and just shaking up the way that we teach kids at school.
Thank you so much. Like I said, the honor has been all mine. The pleasure and the joy has been mine. And thank you for doing what you do, and spotlighting those of us that kind of go underappreciated, and continuing to reach out to people and give us a voice. I really appreciate it. I don't know how to express that in words alone.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.